Hello, Waxers, and welcome to Wax and Lyrical with Mainz and Dutts. I'm your host, Mainz, and my colleague, whose dedication to the podcast knows no bounds, is Mr. Neil Dutton. How are we, Neil?
I'm fine, very well. I'm sure everyone will be pleased to know that my cricket comeback passed without a hitch, from a health point of view, obviously.
How was the score?
I made an elegant 15-ball duck, as we were all out for 43.
That's not good for the people who are unaware of cricket.
No. But,
being in for 15 balls is reasonable in a score of 43. Scoring none is not great. The team getting 43 overall is...
arse.
Yeah, pretty much. People are wondering why your dedication to the podcast knows no bounds. Dutton, after we record this, we'll be staying up until 3 o'clock UK time, 10 Eastern time, to interview the brilliant Evan Siva, senior fantasy writer for Rotoworlds. A massive get for Dutton, which involves him then staying up in the middle of the night.
But, maybe, people would think, well, if he's going to be up anyway, he can take a turn with the baby. They would be wrong.
Can't do two things at once, Dutton. You're a man, you can't multitask.
Exactly.
This week, along with the interview with Evan Silva, we're up to the NFC South, Dutton, with the Super Bowl losers and other teams, the Atlanta Falcons, the New Orleans Saints, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah. Diagonals boys.
Diagonals boys, indeed, Dutton, indeed. Before we get to that, Dutton, I've got a couple of questions for you as the season is beginning almost with pre-season. Have you watched any of the pre-season games?
Yes. I've watched the Eagles. I've watched the Browns and Packers. And what did I start? I started watching the Chiefs Seahawks as well.
Any takeaways from those games?
Robert Griffin looks intent on staying in the pocket even if it kills him.
Which he probably will do.
Chase Daniel is not very good.
That's an issue when you paid him $21 million, right?
Mm-hmm. And Thomas Rawls ain't getting that job. He's not being handed it.
So the question I have is: should people be watching pre-season? Should they watch all the games? Should they just watch their respective teams? Should they just watch the big teams? What would you suggest to people? Because the first teamers are barely going to play in week 1, barely going to play in week 2, might have a full quarter in week 3, and then not appear in week 4. Is it worth even watching?
Well, if you follow a strong team, a perennial powerhouse, get stuffed. But also, if that's the case, then there's probably not that many questions you need answering. If you're following teams of slightly less stable nature, and there are serious question marks at spots along the roster, especially for fantasy purposes, running back, wide receiver, maybe tight end, maybe quarterback, then they are worth watching because you can gauge from the first game. If someone plays a lot of snaps, they're probably on the bubble. If they don't play very many, they're making the team. I think a popular breakout star for the Eagles this year is tight end Trey Burton. He played 8 snaps on Monday, so I think he's pretty safe. But there's people like the Detroit backfield is a huge question mark. We don't know about Amir Abdullah's health. We don't know, is Theo Riddick just a receiver? And then they've got preseason MVP perennial Zach Zenner, who just literally he just runs over people. So these are things that you need to be aware of, especially as we start getting down to the time of where cuts will be made for reasons other than sneaking girls into your dormitory.
Yeah, that's a Hard Knocks reference for anyone who hasn't watched it yet.
Also
available now on Game Pass and Sky Sports.
Yeah. Dion Long, the receiver released for that reason, was also released by the Eagles on Sunday. Let's assume it wasn't for the same reason.
I'd assume so, Dutton. And on the Eagles, big trade today, quote unquote, with your Dorial Green-Beckham moving from the Titans for a sixth offensive lineman on the Eagles. What does this say about what the Titans think of Dorial Green-Beckham, but also what needs the Eagles have on offense?
Well, the Eagles receiver core is potentially up there. But certainly it was earlier today before the news broke. It could have paced the 2003 Eagles wide receiver room for one of the most inept position groups in NFL history. This, of course, was the famous or infamous group that caught 3 touchdown passes on the way on a team that went to the NFC Championship game. Such luminaries as Todd Pinkston, James Thrash, and Freddie Mitchell. So when you had Jordan Matthews getting injured, you got Ruben Randall half-arsing his way through a game. You got Chris Givens, I can go deep. That's lovely. Thanks for that. It was, the cupboard was bare, and Nelson Aguilar, who there are rumours coming out that basically the Eagles think, he's done. They think it's a total sunk cost. So the idea that to bring in someone who I've been a big defender of DGB, I certainly was. If anyone caught last week's pod, not a fan of his previous employers. He has all the talent, he has all the tools to be one of the best wide receivers in the game. I generally believe that. Unfortunately, he's ill-disciplined, he's somewhat lazy, and he is a potential off-the-field problem. But the Eagles are obviously thinking, we've invested an awful lot into this quarterback. We're going to have to take some risks with the roster. So I like the idea because he could be an absolute red zone monster, and he could give whoever your quarterback is an easy target. Dennis Kelly was, a solid swing tackle, but they obviously thought losing Lane Johnson for 10 games, this isn't the guy we want in, so let's get what we can for him. And basically, and dropping the professional veneer, I'd have taken a bag of balls for him.
And in theory, the Titans have given you what they presume to be a bag of balls because they are proposing to have the 2016 season without throwing to a wide receiver, I assume.
In a league that makes Mike Mularkey a head coach, a team can have no wide receivers.
It's true. And as our friend of the show, Marcus Grant, would say, Delaney for life. So let's get on with the preview. It's the NFC South, and let's get on with it. And let's get our first team, and that team is the Atlanta Falcons. The question I have for you, Dutton, on the Atlanta Falcons is pretty simple, actually. What does this team have to do to leave mediocrity behind?
Rush the quarterback and score touchdowns in the red zone.
It is that simple, right? They finished, was it 8-8 last year, or not?
Yes, 8-8. They started 5-0 and went 8-8.
And they were boring and mediocre and just had Julio Jones, and Matt Ryan wasn't very good. We thought he was going to be Kyle Shanahan. They got Devontae Freeman, seemed to start well, kind of fell off. But the defence is just blur, and has been blur for, I don't know, it seems like a decade. They just never seem to be able to rush the passer. Have they addressed those situations, I guess?
Well, not really. They've tried to, basically they brought in the boy Neal. There's a Keanu Neal, who's a safety, who's something in the Earl Thomas mould. We know, obviously, that Dan Quinn, it's such a boring team, I'm forgetting the names. Dan Quinn, obviously, he's from the Seattle school, so he knows all about, the cover 3, one high safety, have that enforcer in the middle. But the pass rush is still anemic, and in a division where they have, Drew Brees, who's, future Hall of Famer, they have the current MVP, and they have Jameis Winston, who's, a young up-and-coming. You've got to get after the quarterback, and it's as I say, since John Abraham and his pomp, they've had no one. They were very, very good moving the ball up to the opposition 20 last year, but once they got into it, they crapped the bed. They were one of the worst touchdown-scoring teams in the red zone, despite being one of the league's most proficient in getting into it. So they need to do something. They've brought in Austin Hooper through the draft. I'm a big fan. I think he could be. I say this every year because only needs one of them to do it. He could be the rookie tight end who becomes fantasy relevant because he's only going to get past old faithful Jacob Tammy and Levine Toilolo, whatever you pronounce it, for serious playing time. And, he's a big target in the red zone, but they're just a very dull team.
You're right, Tottenham, but it amazes me when you've got someone like Julio Jones that he can be dull. Do you know what I mean? But you're right, and I look and I think it wasn't Matt Ryan's best year. Him and Kyle Shanahan didn't seem to quite be on the same page. That, for me, that's how they get rid of mediocrity. They fix that issue. They signed, was it Marvin Jones? No. Mohamed Sanu, the other Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver. He needs touches. They both need to Jones and Sanu. They need to get Devontae Freeman the ball. As you said, they need to score more touchdowns in the red zone. Over-under Dutton from Vegas is 7.5. Road games against the Raiders, the Broncos, Seahawks, Eagles and LA Rams. Home games against the Chargers, the Packers, the Cardinals, the Chiefs and the 49ers. Tough home schedule. 7.5 Dutton, what are your thoughts?
A lick over. This team, if it was a stick of rock, would have 8-8 running right through it.
They are becoming a kind of St. Louis / LA Rams style 7-9, 8-8 outfit. I look and think Broncos loss, Seahawks loss, probably lose one of the Rams and Eagles games, lose against the Packers, lose against the Cardinals, probably lose against the Chiefs. Got to play Carolina, got to play Tampa Bay. Don't want to spoil the surprise, but I think they might be half decent this year. I'm going to go under. I see them as 7-9. It's tight, but I just don't think it's quite there, and I don't really know what's missing. As you said, they're proper boring, Atlanta, and I don't really know why. I can't quite grasp why I think they're boring. I think they just are. Enough of the records done. Talk me through why Julio Jones is a fancy stud.
Because he's a target monster. We talked ad nauseum last year about Kyle Shanahan, and in his scheme he feeds and force feeds again his ex-receiver. We saw that the rotting corpse of Roddy White was pretty much written out of the game plan. They didn't have another option at wide receiver. They had Leonard Hankerson, who had a few decent games, then got cut, and has since been cut again for the second time by the Bills. They had Devonta Freeman, who would still have been a good passing weapon, even if he didn't rush a single yard. But the one constant was Julio Jones, and everyone made reference to how close Antonio Brown came to beating Marvin Harrison's single-season receiving record. He finished with the exact same number of receptions as Julio Jones. So Julio's just he's right up there in terms of how much he can get from a volume point of view. This team goes if Julio Jones goes. If it's a criticism I seem to be making about a lot of the top receivers, he doesn't score enough touchdowns for how much work he gets. So if he can just slightly address that, he should be one of the first 3 names off the board in any draft.
Who's the fantasy dud done?
Fantasy dud, there's that many of them. I personally don't buy the Mohamed Sanu hype. I think he's been brought in to play a secondary role, despite spending most of his career as a third wheel. He's had occasional flashes of adequacy when AJ Green hasn't been there. But he averaged 9 targets, 5 catches, and 95 yards a game when AJ Green was missing in 2014, I believe. His career mark is 4 targets, 3 catches, and 28 yards when AJ Green is playing. So he's going to chip in. He only has to be better than Roddy White. Well, newsflash, everyone's better than Roddy White. I just don't think, for what people expect of him, I think his value... I think a lot of people are expecting great things from him, but last time I checked, his ADP was wide receiver 63, and I think that's probably where I would have him.
Recap on the Atlanta Falcons. 7.5. Dutton thinks a lick over. I think a lick under. Fantasy stud, obviously Julio Jones, and fantasy dud. Dutton's not high on Mohamed Sanu,
but he's not alone.
But he's not alone in that list. Next Dutton, let's get on to defending Super Bowl losers, the NFC champs, the Carolina Panthers. Question I have on them is, another year of Funchess, and with Benjamin back, can this offense be one of the best in the league?
This offense can be as good as it was last year.
Which was okay, right? It was decent. It was top 10, right?
It was bloody good. I'm not a big believer that, slide Kelvin Benjamin back in, you've got a superstar. Based on what? Most of his production in his wonderful rookie year came when the team was 10 points or more down. 5 of his 9 receiving touchdowns came when his team was more than 10 points behind. Do you think the Panthers are going to be 10 points behind very often this year?
I'd assume not, Dutton.
So I don't see why we're assuming that this, far from sure-handed receiver, who I think was at or around 50% catch rate in his first season, struggled with drops, and he's coming off, a significant injury. I don't see how he suddenly turns this into the 2007 Patriots.
I don't necessarily think they're going to be the 2007 Patriots. I just think Funchess and Benjamin on either side, Jonathan Stewart, Cam Newton, you've got Greg Olsen, you've got the workings of something that might work, right? That's all. That for me is all I'm saying, is that it's not. I'm not suggesting it would be the 2007 Patriots, but I think it's a very good offense, or it's got the chance to be a very good offense.
It would not stun me if Devin Funchess outscored Kelvin Benjamin in every significant category. Receptions, receiving yards and touchdowns. It really wouldn't stun me.
Yeah, no, I don't think it should do. I don't think it should do. Dutton, Vegas, 10.5 for the Carolina Panthers. Road games, first game of the season, Broncos. Then they got Rams, Raiders, Seahawks and Washington. They got home games against the 49ers, the Vikings, the Cardinals, the Chiefs and the Chargers. 10.5.
Over.
By a lot, don't know. You see this as a 12-4 team, 13-3, or a drop back from last year, but still one of the best teams in the league.
Yeah, a drop back from last year. I don't think it's not going 15-1 again. This team, they have made some improvements. They've obviously had a few losses. They've lost, Jared Allen, so the pass rush still needs to step up. They've still got Luke Kuechly. The scheme has shown that they are obviously confident they can plug in any cornerback to replace Josh Norman. I think it's a very, very good team. I just think that maybe this year they will lean more towards grinding teams into the dirt rather than trying to absolutely, annihilate them, because they have to be careful. Jonathan Stewart was pretty inefficient, to be honest. I mean, he had a good season, but he doesn't score an awful lot of points. And if he goes down, they've got nothing at running back. So I think they're a good team. I think it's a 11-5, 12-4 team, but probably that will probably get them 1 or 2 seed, I would have thought.
It's not an easy schedule in terms of the out of division games. Away at the Broncos' first game, not easy. Don't care who the quarterback is. Rams away.
The Broncos, by the sound of it.
Neither the Broncos, yeah. Rams away against that defensive line. The Raiders are going to be frisky. Seattle. I'm not going to talk about Washington. Might jinx it. Vikings, Cardinals, Chiefs. These are decent teams, but I think the Carolina are better. I think they're a 12-4 team, and I think they're probably in with a sniff of going back to the Super Bowl. I think there's a high possibility they are in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bloody good team. They're very well coached, and despite his preening schmoism, they're quite a likeable team. I like Ron Rivera. I think they've got some good eggs on this unit.
I quite like preening schmoism of Cam Newton. He's got game to back it up. My thoughts on the arrogance stakes. You can be arrogant if you've got game, and he's proved over the past year that he's definitely got it. No
one will ever have the level of arrogance or the level of game to back up that arrogance better than what Usain Bolt did this week.
No, smiling at a camera while running 9.81 to win an Olympic gold medal is another stratosphere.
While the people next year are busting every gut, bursting every sinew to keep up, and you look as if literally you look like you're jogging and are aware of the cameras.
Being aware of the cameras is unbelievable. That's a scary thought. It's a scary thought. Dutton, is it Cam Newton as the fantasy stud for the Carolina Panthers?
Yes, but please don't go and do anything stupid like drafting him ridiculously early. It's not, I'm all about 2 things this year, of which I've given lip service to in the past, but I'm now full on board with. 0 RB, I am a convert, and late round quarterback. Cam Newton is the MVP. He's a dual threat quarterback. He accounted for 40 touchdowns last year. That's wonderful. Don't go chasing that season. It's gone. He'll probably be a top 5 quarterback because he's been one in every season of his career. He's going to be, because he's the goal line back in this team. So he's the star. He will top all the fantasy points. The best way to get any piece of this offense is to get Cam Newton, but don't pay over the odds for him.
Who's the fantasy dud done?
Ted Ginn. I'm touchdowns are a very, very volatile way of judging someone's worth and value in fantasy football. Yeah, he did score 10 touchdowns last year on, how many receptions was it? 97 targets, and he had 10 touchdowns. That's wonderful. Take those 10 touchdowns away, and I know we can't, that doesn't how it works, but he caught 44 of those 97 targets. That's less than half. You cannot be a stud wide receiver in the NFL, catch less than half of the balls thrown to you. It's not that league anymore. Ted Ginn has been a journeyman. He's a first-round pick who, basically, other than last year, has been a kickoff specialist. It was a lovely story. I dare say he'll chip in, but this just looks to me like one of those offenses that'll be great in reality, but not that good in fantasy.
I looked on and just think, we should look back at Ted Ginn and think, he's done well to stay in the league. Do you know what I mean? Because he was a first-round bust in theory, but somehow managed to stay in the league and been relevant in the league for a period of time.
One of the funny things, I remember a tweet this time last year, a bit earlier, when the Panthers signed Michael Orr and Ted Ginn. It said, the tweet said, Panthers signed Ted Ginn and Michael Orr. Now they just need a wide receiver and a right tackle.
Worked out okay for them last year.
Yeah.
Carolina Panthers, Vegas say 10.5, me and Dutton say over, probably 12-4. I think they've got a chance of going to the NFC Championship game, if not the Super Bowl. Fantasy stud is obviously Cam Newton, but that doesn't mean that you draft him in the first 6 picks. Go late on your quarterbacks. He won't be accounting for 40 touchdowns this year. Fantasy dud is Ted Ginn Jr. Bravo to his career of lasting this long in the league, but that doesn't mean he should be in your fantasy team. Next team on the board, Dutton, is the New Orleans Saints. And the one question is this the last hurrah for Peyton and Breeze?
Well, you'd assume that Peyton will be here for a while. He did sign his new contract, and Tom Benson might be crackers, but he's not going to give money away that easily. They've made no effort to renegotiate his Drew Brees' contract, so he's going to carry the $30 million cap hit this year. You'd think of the way that they've constantly kicked his can down the road, as it were, contractually speaking, that maybe this might make some fiscal sense. Maybe they want to be a bit more responsible with the books for going into next year. But I really don't think it's so, because this is the New Orleans Saints. They'll get something sorted out. Drew Brees will still be here this end of this year, start of next year. How much longer? I don't know. But he's still... I think you can make the case he's one of the most important players to his franchise in NFL history. Every other team you talk about, continuity, next man up. If Breeze went down or Breeze leaves the Saints, what are they? They are the Aints. That's what they become again.
I just look at the New Orleans Saints and think, didn't you used to be good?
Didn't they used to be crap longer?
Yeah, true. But what I mean is, with Peyton and Breeze more, I'm not sure where this team's any good. I know the big buzz on is it Mike Mitchell, the wide receiver, but Thomas. I'm like, Thomas. Sorry. I'm just like, this team isn't very good, and I think it's the worst team in this division quite comfortably. And I'm not 100% sure what they've done to make the defense any better, apart from get rid of Rob Ryan. By the way, that's a really positive thing, but it doesn't mean you've made the defense any better. In Vegas, Dutton, Saints are 7.5. Road games against the Giants, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the 49ers and the Cardinals. Home games against the Raiders, the Seahawks, the Broncos, the Rams and the Lions. 7.5.
That is brutal. I'm going to have to take the under because I'm with you. I think this team is defensively pathetic. They'll score lots of points. They always do. They've got Drew Brees. They've got lots of weapons. But they'll have to score lots of points because they won't be able to keep teams out.
I looked up and I'm missing something here on the New Orleans Saints. This is a 4-win team for me. A 5-win team. 7.5. Vegas thinks they're going... wants us to try and think they're going 500. I just do not see it. Even the Seahawks and the Broncos... Are they going to beat them at home? Those road games, Cardinals, Chiefs, Giants, Chargers. Going to be shootouts, but the shootouts are probably going to lose. I'm not in on the Saints at all. This is a massive under for me. Who is the fantasy stud, however, on the New Orleans Saints?
Well, the fantasy stud, and he's a player that he's been taken after Ben Roethlisberger, who everyone is always very high on. But actually, from a fantasy point of view, he's never quite been there consistently. It's Drew Brees. He's a lock for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. It's that simple. I'm probably pushing 5,000. He's the best way, excuse me, if in doubt, to get any part of the Saints offense is to get the man who does it all. I say his current ADP, he's going in the 6th, 7th round. Roethlisberger's going 2 rounds earlier. That's madness. I know even Steelers fans like Sigmund Bloom thinks it's madness. There are other people. I mean, I like Brandon Cooks. He could be a potential, an upside of wide receiver 1. Kobe Fleener could be a top 5 tight end. I quite like Mark Ingram, except he can never stay fit. If they all drop, there's Travaris Cadet who could come in. I wrote something about him for Rotoviz. You can find that at Rotoviz. Look for my author page. But I think ultimately, the straw that stirs the drink is Drew Brees. And at his current ADP, he's a steal.
Who's the fancy stud done?
Fancy stud is Brandon Coleman. He was last year's Michael Thomas, as it were. He was going to be the big receiver who comes in and takes over from Marquise Colston. Unfortunately, he's not quite there. He's 6'3". He's a big old unit. He saw 2 red zone targets in week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals, and I think saw 3 for the rest of the season. That's not a red zone weapon. That's a spare part. He's going to fall behind Cooks, Willie Snead, then they've got the passing backs, CJ Spiller, Mark Ingram's no slouch in the passing game, Kobe Fleener and Josh Hill. So thanks very much for coming, Brandon. We'll keep your number handy should that whole squad get injured. But other than that, see you later.
New Orleans Saints, Vegas say 7.5. Me and Dutton are not convinced. Dutton's under, I am way under. This would be a lock for me on if you were putting some money on it. Fancy stud is still Drew Brees. As Dutton said, he's the straw that stirs the drink. He is the New Orleans Saints, probably the greatest offensive free agent of all time, and probably could be mayor of Louisiana if he wished. Fancy dud is Brandon Coleman. It ain't going to work. He may be 6'3", but 2 red zone targets last year means you're not welcome here anymore. Final team, Dutton. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, we've been known to be very wrong on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and when I say we, I mean you. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say something that's a bit ridiculous now. Is this actually the team that's going to challenge the Panthers this year?
Ahead of the other two, yes. Whether that means it's a credible challenge, I don't know, but they will, in my opinion, they are as well equipped to challenge as the others. I can't get too excited about them, and I can't get too negative because I'll just be wrong.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. I think if you ever listen to the Grantland NFL show with Robert Mason and Bill Barnwell before that disappeared, they always got these totally wrong, and me and Dutton have always got these totally wrong. I'm with you. I like this team. I like where it's going. I think Jameis Winston was very good last year in certain situations for a rookie, especially. They've got some weapons. The defense is okay. It's got some weapons on it. I like what they're trying to do. I like the wide receivers. Yeah, I'm not going to get too overconfident because then we can repeat it later in the year and we look like fools. For Vegas, it's 7.5, same as the Saints. Road games against the Cardinals, the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Chargers, and Dallas. Home games against the LA Rams, the Broncos, the Raiders, the Chicago Bears, and Seahawks. 7.5.
Under.
Okay, talk me through it, Don.
Again, it's that thing. I think they are building something, but I think they're excuse me. It's still a sophomore season for famous Jameis, who, when he was good last year, was very good, but when he was bad, he made some absolute shockers. Some of his interceptions were abysmal. But they obviously think, very highly of him and highly enough of his relationship with Dirk Cotter that's why they promoted him to head coach. So that kind of continuity can only stand him in good stead. He's got the weapons, as I say. They've got Charles Sims, who they like. They've kept Doug Martin around. We know about Mike Evans. He has to be better than he was last year. Very, very high targets and percentage, very low efficiency numbers. Needs to stop dropping balls in the end zone. That'll be a good start. Defensively, as I say, they've got, like Gerald McCoy, Levante David, what was the boy's name? Alexander. He was the rookie. He was very good, but he got suspended. Can't remember his name. This is how well researched I'm doing this. They've got Mike Smith as defensive coordinator. Mike Smith has shown in the past to be a very good defensive coordinator. We talked last week about how the Jags used to be a defensive juggernaut. Yeah, when Mike Smith was defensive coordinator. So that's he's got the skins on the wall to come out and do it. They've always been a defensive team. Going back as, the Tony Dungy days, this team was built on defense. Again, they are in a division where the best defense will win out. Ultimately, you can have all this firepower, but why are the Panthers the best team in this division? Because they've got the best defense. And, they've got Cam Newton as well, but the best defense helps. So if they can improve and finally get a pass rush again, they'll be competitive. But as I say, I'm saying under because I know for a fact by saying under, I'll be wrong.
So if we cut in the middle and one of us is going to be wrong and one of us is going to be right, this is a 9-10 win team, done. I don't see why it's not in this division. They should beat the Saints twice, beat the Falcons once, maybe split with the Panthers, probably not, but they'll win some home games, win some road games. I see them as a 9-7 team. They may not make the playoffs, but they'll definitely be battling for the playoffs. I like the progression of Winston. I understand what you're saying about the shocking interceptions, but I also like the way he plays. I like the way he manages the game and how he's trying to do things, and I think that can only stand them in good stead going forward as a team. As you said, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers must have liked it because they promoted Dirk Cutter, and he must have liked what that whole offense did. The defense, you've got Mike Smith. That's a good thing to have, absolutely. So I'm on board on. So if there was a hype train done, I wouldn't be in first class. But what I'd probably do is I'd probably buy one of those anytime returns, so I can get on it as and when I feel appropriate. So I bought an anytime return on the Tampa Bay Bucks, but I haven't decided when I'm going to get on board.
See, I haven't bought a ticket, but I'm currently on the key side, gambling for a third class ticket with my, Italian mate, just minutes before the boat leaves.
Okay, good call done. Fantasy stuff for the Tampa Bay Bucks.
It's Mike Evans, because I just think we saw how good he can be as a rookie, and we are seeing that how good a player he made Johnny Manziel look. He's been working on his chemistry with Jameis Winston, totally different type of quarterback than he's used to been working with. That rapport's taken some time to develop. And as I say, he's going to get the targets. He just needs to be more efficient with it. This team, Dirk Cutter is quite an interesting character in the sense that he does shape his offense depending on what he's got available to him. He's not no, this is what I'm going to do. People talk about the Kubiak offense and the Shanahan offense. There's no such thing as a Dirk Cutter offense because he can commit to the run or he can be quite pass happy. It depends what he's got. So if Doug Martin does he's had one good year, it's time to disappear. Well, that's good news for Winston. It's good news for Mike Evans. And it's good news for Vincent Jackson, who's still going to be involved.
Who's the fantasy dud done?
Austin Severian-Jenkins. I thought he could have been a rookie breakout. He wasn't. I thought he was going to be a sophomore breakout. He wasn't. I think he's an idiot. I think his act is wearing thin. It's a new coach, but it's an offensive coordinator who's had to deal with your crap for the last 2 years, mate. So it's something I can never remember. Is it Keith Armstrong? I think he was the Falcon special teams coach when they were on Hard Knocks. He shouted at them that you're not good enough to be an arsehole. That's Austin Severian-Jenkins. I think his ego's writing checks his body can't cash. He's got all the talent in the world, but he's missed half a season. So he's missed a full season, the last 2 seasons. So you can argue that, but he's fresh. No, he's not. He's being outsnapped, outplayed, and outperformed by Cameron Brate. So, no, not for me. Austin Severian-Jenkins, we're done.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers. a quiet level of not telling you that we're confident about them. Dutton goes for the under just because otherwise you'd be right, and I'm going for the over because I'll probably be wrong. We don't know. We want to get on board. Dutton's betting his third-class ticket on the hype train. I bought mine, but it's an any-time return. I haven't decided when I'm getting on it yet. Fancy stud is Mike Evans. Dutton likes him, and big enough to say that he helped Johnny Manziel become an NFL player. Didn't help him stop being an NFL player, but they were on different teams. Fancy dud, Austin Safarian Jenkins. Dutton doesn't like him. You can tell that Dutton may have picked him in multiple fancy leagues in the past couple of years. Dutton, that's the NFC South preview. I'm going to leave the show now for today because, you know, I'm not staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning to listen to Evan Silva because I've got a real job. So that's it from me, and let's pass you over to you and Evan Silva talking all things fantasy.
Joining me on the line now is Evan Silva. He's the senior football editor of Rotoworlds. Evan, thanks very much for joining me. How are we today?
Neil, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, not a problem. As I say, we're working our way through everyone at Rotoworld. We spoke to Pat Doherty, we spoke to Ray. We spoke to Ray last week, actually, and I think we pretty much spent most of the 20 minutes depressing him because we talked about teams he follows that aren't very good. So we'll try.
Oh my goodness.
We'll try not to. We'll try to keep it lighter than that, to be honest.
Yeah, because he likes a bad soccer team and the Tennessee Titans. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yeah. It's you know heady times in the Summerlin house.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of the Tennessee Titans, we'll start there straight away. There was the news earlier today that the Eagles have traded for troubled wide receiver Dorial Green-Beckham. I was just interested what your thoughts are regarding the trade from both points of view, really, especially from a fantasy angle.
Yeah, I mean, from a real-life NFL angle, and I understand that you just asked me a fantasy angle, but from a real-life NFL angle, I think that the Eagles got the better end of the trade because at least they get some upside with the guy that they acquired, whereas the Titans only got a backup caliber offensive lineman. So, you know, even for as down as the community is right now on Dorial Green-Beckham, and I'm down on him as well, I mean, I thought the deal went better for the Eagles, even if Dorial Green-Beckham is a bust. Regardless of the results of this deal, at least the Eagles are taking a shot and trying to get a player who could, you know, significantly upgrade their roster as opposed to just a backup tackle / guard. You know, Dorial Green-Beckham flashed in his opportunities last year. He struggled to learn the playbook in Tennessee. He was not a guy that was drafted by the current GM there, John Robinson, and John Robinson is trying to put his mark on the roster. And, you know, I thought the move was actually kind of silly. And I think that actually John Robinson has made a few silly moves, trading up for Jack Conklin in the top 10. But, you know, I think that it's obviously a reflection of Dorial Green-Beckham's inability to learn the playbook and maybe some ego things with the Titans front office. I think that in Philadelphia, Dorial Green-Beckham, his outlook is not great, but it's better than it was as a second to third team receiver in Tennessee because I think he's going to have a chance to start for the Eagles.
From the Eagles' point of view, how do you think this affects the position of the secondary receivers, as it were? I mean, Ruben Randall, we pretty much know what we're going to get from Ruben Randall at this stage of the game, i.e., not an awful lot of effort and occasional flashes of adequacy. But also the second-year man Nelson Aguilar. I mean, there was a few people who were hoping maybe that he'd push on this year and become, you know, a key contributor after a fairly disappointing rookie season. What do you think this says about their place on the roster this season and beyond?
Well, the Eagles don't have any perimeter wide receivers. They don't have any guys who can win down the sideline. You know, they've got Jordan Matthews, who's a big slot receiver, who's a Marcus Colston type. They've got Nelson Aguilar, who really is miscast as an outside receiver. He's a guy who should be working on the interior, but he has problems catching the football. And, for guys that that play on the interior and don't average a lot of yards per catch, you want them to be inefficient and not drop a lot of balls. And Nelson Aguilar has a problem catching the football. So they need guys that can play outside and that can win outside in their West Coast offense. And Dorial Green-Beckham, for all of his shortcomings, he is a guy who can win outside. I think that the Eagles realize that. I think that they realize that Nelson Aguilar is not going to be a perimeter receiver in the NFL. Ruben Randle is, at best a mid-range to low-end option as a third receiver in an NFL offense. And I think the same probably goes for Chris Givens. So I think the Eagles looked at their roster and they said, we need a guy who can, at least gives us a chance to win outside. Maybe they won't give him a lot of complex routes to run, but at least he can be a presence on the boundary. And I think that they got that in Dorial Green-Beckham. Hopefully he can take a step forward in his career. Hopefully that this can kind of serve as a, something that will, hit the switch for him in his career, that he got traded for a backup offensive lineman.
Is his position, excuse me, as I say, from a fantasy angle, the Eagles seem to be one of those offenses that it's hard to get excited about any of them. Right. How much do you want to see from him in pre-season before, and what round would you be comfortable taking him, if at all, in fantasy?
Yeah, he's not really on the radar in redraft leagues, I think. I think that this is an offense that's should be able to run the ball relatively well, is going to play slow, is going to try to lean on their defense. They do have a very talented front seven on defense, and they have two great safeties. And hopefully they can, from their standpoint, hopefully they can kind of make up for their inadequacies at cornerback. But they have the makings of what could be an above-average defense. The losing Lane Johnson stinks, but otherwise they have a pretty good offensive line, and they should be able to run the ball. And they have a few good tight ends who can be contributors. But I think that they're going to be a slow-playing offense. I think you're looking at Jordan Matthews. I think you're looking at Zach Ertz. I think you're looking at Ryan Matthews. And then if anybody else emerges as a fantasy factor, it would pretty much be a surprise. But we know that Dorial Green-Beckham has talent, so he's somebody that we'll be paying attention to, but I can't really see drafting him in a redraft league right now. I think if you're in a dynasty league, not a whole lot really has changed, and you're hoping that the change of scenery benefits him.
Moving on to another team, the Denver Broncos, their wide receiver situation. In your recent your rankings of PPR players, you had Demaryius Thomas, excuse me, obviously higher up in your rankings than Emmanuel Sanders, but it pretty much looked as if you were saying nicer things about Sanders than you were Thomas. Could you envisage a situation? Well, who was the better value at their current ADP? Would you say Thomas where he's going, or Sanders where he's going?
Yeah, so I think where I have Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders ranked, you will very rarely get Demaryius Thomas in your draft if you're kind of using my rankings to draft. But you will be in the mix to get Emmanuel Sanders. And I think that the statistical projection and the target projection is stronger for Demaryius Thomas, just entering the season, just from a raw statistical projection standpoint. But it wouldn't surprise me if Emmanuel Sanders ends up being the wide receiver to own in Denver, and therefore I'm more willing to take him in the 5th or 6th round than I am willing to take Demaryius Thomas near the 2nd, 3rd round turn. I think that there are a lot of negative data points for Demaryius Thomas. His efficiency has slipped 3 years running. He's actually been outplayed as a red zone receiver. And when you think of Demaryius Thomas, he's 6'3", 230 pounds. He should be a guy who's dominating in the red zone, but he's been one of the worst red zone receivers in football over the last 2 seasons. And Emmanuel Sanders has actually outplayed him in scoring position. And I think just based on their effectiveness over the last 2 seasons, I don't think it should surprise anyone if Emmanuel Sanders outscores Demaryius Thomas this year. Now, in the first preseason game, we saw Demaryius Thomas get wide open and make a play. And so that's going to kind of, for some people, that's going to solidify in their minds that he's a value pick. You know, there's people that believe that he's a value pick. That will solidify that for them. But that's not how I'm viewing it. And I'm going to let other people draft Demaryius Thomas in season-long leagues this year. And I'm looking at Emmanuel Sanders when he goes near the 5th, 6th turn.
I mean, obviously, the situation with the quarterbacks in Denver is quite volatile, and ultimately,
Sure.
you never really want to be in a position where your fantasy team is reliant on Mark Sanchez, I suppose.
That's a big issue. I mean, and I don't think that we can sit back here and pretend that it's not a big issue, because it's going to lead to volatility. I mean, there are going to be games where the Broncos' passing offense produces, 130 passing yards in a week, and people aren't going to be productive. I mean, they want to run the football, they want to lean on their defense. Their quarterbacks are bad, and I understand that Demaryius Thomas has a big raw projection in terms of his targets for the season, but he's not someone that I'm willing to invest a 2nd or 3rd round fantasy pick in, because he's going to be volatile week to week. He's been ineffective in scoring position, and I think that he's on the decline as a football player, and I think that shows up in not only his statistics, but on game tape, where I understand that he had like almost 100 catches last year, but the way he played, he didn't play very well.
Moving on to another team now, the Arizona Cardinals. They have 3 main wide receivers, Larry Fitz, Michael Floyd and John Brown. They all seem to be, pretty much similar as it was last year. They all seem to be going around the same sort of time. Which would you be more comfortable taking of the 3, or would the safest thing to do be let someone else take them and try and get Carson Palmer late in the draft to try and get a piece of all of them?
Yeah, but even Carson Palmer goes a little bit before I would be willing to take him. So that's kind of not really in play for me. I don't think it's a bad strategy, but just where he goes, if he goes 8th, 9th round, like I'm not going to use an 8th or 9th round pick on a devalued position, with a guy who's 37, 38 years old, and had 10 turnovers in his last 4 games last season. Like, I'm just going to let somebody else deal with that. I think that if you're looking at the wide receivers, the one to be aggressive about is Michael Floyd. I like that he has the contract year narrative. I like that when David Johnson took over as the Cardinals starting running back, from that point on, Michael Floyd was the number 1 receiver in their offense, led the team in targets during David Johnson's 7 starts, including the playoffs. Larry Fitzgerald's targets plummeted. I mean, he lost more than 4 targets per game with David Johnson running routes over the middle. I think that you could argue that, based historically on their performance, that John Brown maybe has the highest floor of the Cardinals wide receivers, but he's a guy who's missed more than 2 weeks now with a concussion, and that's concerning. So I think if I'm going to be aggressive drafting a wide receiver in Arizona, it would be Michael Floyd. John Brown would be number 2 for me, and Larry Fitzgerald would be number 3.
Staying in the division, we got the Seattle Seahawks, and they've got like murky waters. Well, from fantasy point of view, I'm sure they're perfectly comfortable with it at their running back spot. Do you see this emerging as a running back by committee with Thomas Rawls, Christa Michael and CJ Procise, or do you eventually see one of them running away with the job and earning it full-time themselves?
I think that they will open the year using Kristen Michael some, And then I think that it will be based, the distribution from there will be based on how effective guys are. I mean, it sounds like C.J. Prosise already had a setback with his hamstring. He's a guy who was hurt. I mean, he's a really good prospect, but he was also hurt his final season at Notre Dame. Barely practiced in OTAs and minicamp. Has barely practiced. Maybe even hasn't even practiced at all so far in training camp, and that kind of stuff is really important for a rookie who's competing for looks, for competing for playing time. So I think we will see Thomas Rawls enter the season as the pretty clear-cut lead back, and I think that Christian Michael has done enough to show the coaching staff that he's worthy of some early season touches, and then they will kind of they'll feel it out from there. So I mean, that sounds like it's kind of hedging. I'm not making a really strong statement there, but I think that the coach, I think it would be almost dishonest for me to pretend like I know how this is going to go, because I think that it's going to be based on effectiveness, and the coaching staff is going to put out there whoever is the most effective.
I mean, you say it's hedging. It doesn't. I mean, it's a difficult situation with Seattle, because they showed last year that they do have the potential to change their spots. Midstream, as it were. They went from quite run heavy to pass heavy. So there is going to be. They do have history of basically making life a misery for anyone trying to follow their fantasy team with any degree of certainty.
Yeah, and they're also a team that is built on the philosophy of competition. It goes back to when they gave Matt Flynn a huge contract, and then they started their third-round pick that a lot of people didn't think would ever become an NFL starter. They started Russell Wilson in week 1. They started a 5th-round pick, converted wide receiver Richard Sherman at cornerback. They started a 5th-round pick that a lot of people thought would be a linebacker in Cam Chancellor at strong safety. So it's a team that is built on competition, and they're going to let these guys compete. And that's how Pete Carroll ran his program at USC, and that's how it's going to be in Seattle. I mean, I like Thomas Rawls as a fantasy pick. I think that Christian Michael's emergence is a little bit of a concern for Thomas Rawls. But he's got big touchdown upside in an offense that is going to be really, really efficient, that is going to live in the opposing red zone, that's going to have the ball a lot because their defense is so good, and has a running quarterback, which increases the efficiency of the rushing offense. They're a team that has been able to get away with having poor personnel on the offensive line because of their quarterback and because of their offensive line coach, Tom Cable.
The last question I've got for you, Evan, obviously very, very grateful for the time you've given us. You said on a recent pod that you didn't think there was a round late enough where you'd take DeMarco Murray. Are there any other players that other people seem to be quite high on that you really just don't want any piece of at all?
Carlos Hyde. I'll let other people take him in every draft, because in every draft there's somebody that really likes Carlos Hyde. And I mean, I understand why. They like to latch on to the Chip Kelly coaching thing. They like to latch on to the fact that Carlos Hyde has flashed big-time NFL running ability. But the situation sets up really poorly for Carlos Hyde, because, I mean, for me personally, I like to attach my running back picks to good quarterbacks on good teams, and the 49ers check neither of those boxes. And I think that to some extent maybe Carlos Hyde is a little bit overrated as a runner. I mean, he's averaged under 4.1 yards per carry so far in the NFL. He's never been a pass catcher. I know that he had 2 targets on the 49ers opening possession in their preseason opener. But I'm gonna let other people draft Carlos Hyde. I would say the same is the case for Alan Hearns, who I think is a good NFL player, but I think that his touchdowns could fall dramatically this season, like from 10 to 5 or 6, or maybe even 4. This is a guy who was never a big-time touchdown scorer in college, and I think his receptions could fall too. He caught 64 balls last year, and if the Jaguars throw the ball less this season because their defense is going to be better, I think that we will see Allen Robinson emerge as more of a 1A, and Allen Hurns kind of take a back seat as more of a clear, 2B receiver. So Allen Hurns, a guy that almost never gets out of the 6th round, and I really wouldn't even consider him before the 8th round. So, yeah, DeMarco Murray, he did outrun the Chargers defense in the preseason opener, but I think that Derrick Henry's a better running back than DeMarco Murray is, and I also think that they're going to involve Dexter McCluster. So you're talking about a guy on what is projected to be a bad team, the Titans. They have the second lowest Vegas win total in the NFL, who's going to be a committee back, who's not going to get his reception ceiling is limited by Dexter McCluster, and I think that his backup is a better talent than him. So that's definitely a guy that I'm going to avoid and let other people draft. And I know that 71-yard touchdown run is going to up his ADP. And, there's just no way that I would draft him in the 5th round, which is where he's going to start to go.
Going back to obviously when he said about the San Francisco and, attaching your running backs to good quarterbacks, the 49ers did sign Christian Ponder today, which means they just need Jake Locker to get the full selection of 2011 first-round bust quarterbacks. So it's good to know they do have a plan if things go wrong.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better, Neil.
Well, Evan, it's been absolutely great speaking to you. Where can people find you and read your work?
Yeah, you can just check out at Evan Silva on Twitter and also rotoworld.com.
Thanks very much, Evan.
Thank you.